Tonight's event is part of our year-long Lean Into Louisville series of activities, art, exhibits, conversations, and presentations that explore and confront the history of and legacy of all forms of discrimination and inequality. You can learn more at the website leanintolouisville.org. Now, I'm very excited to introduce the moderator for tonight's discussion, and he'll introduce the other two guests. Dr. Alton B. Pollard III is the incoming president of the Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. His official inauguration will take place on April 26th, and he will be installed as the 10th president to lead the Louisville Seminary since its founding in 1853. He comes to Louisville from Howard University School of Divinity, where for over a decade he was professor of religion and culture and served as dean. He holds a BA from Fisk University, earned a Master of Divinity degree from Harvard Divinity School. There's apparently a Fisk contingent in the crowd tonight. Earned a Master of Divinity degree from Harvard Divinity School, and he completed his PhD at Duke University, writing his dissertation on Howard Thurman and the challenge of social regeneration. There may be some Cats fans in the crowd tonight. He has pastored churches in Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Tennessee, and has also served in staff and faculty positions at Emory University, St. Olaf College, and Wake Forest University. He's published extensively, and his areas of research specialization include religion and culture, Black church studies, and educational leadership. I can think of no one better prepared to lead a conversation on tonight's topic. Please join me in welcoming President Alton B. Pollard.
You are a good-looking group. It is my pleasure and privilege to in turn introduce two people who really don't need introductions, but I will fulfill my assignment. The first, Mayor Greg Fischer, committed to growing jobs and creating a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Greg Fischer was elected Louisville's 50th mayor in 2010. As a businessman and entrepreneur, he brings a data-driven approach to city government with a goal of making it more efficient and accessible. During his tenure, Louisville has added 80,000 jobs and 2,700 new businesses and has been named an international model city of compassion. Compassion for our time. In 2013, Mayor Fischer was named Public Official of the Year by Governing Magazine, and in 2017, one of America's most interesting mayors by Political. I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
Okay.
Not sure what it is.
Mayor Mitch Landrieu. When Mitch Landrieu was sworn in as the 61st mayor of New Orleans in May 2010, the recovery from Hurricane Katrina had stalled. The city teetered on bankruptcy, and the New Orleans Police Department was under federal investigation. By implementing sound fiscal management, balanced budgets, and an emphasis on police reform and public safety, New Orleans under Landrieu became one of America's great comeback stories. In his second term as mayor, Mitch Landrieu again received national attention for calling for and achieving the removal of Confederate statues from his city. In 2015, Landrieu was named Public Official of the Year by Governing Magazine. We're going to get right to the work at hand with a few questions, and after our colleagues have had the opportunity to engage one another, to have deep and profound exchange, then we will also have questions from the floor. Mayor Landrieu, thank you for your book, which is in equal parts personal memoir and social political commentary. Now, I must confess, I read the book today. In the Shadow of Statutes. is not only about statues, in my estimation, it is about the erecting of monuments to a past that never was and yet strains to be. I am here referring to monuments in the dictionary sense as, quote, those forms of commemoration, witness, and in this instance, the rewriting of history that casts a long shadow over the life of this nation, even in places where no statues physically exist. As you so powerfully write, the monumentalism of white supremacy and violence was enshrouded in the lost cause. I think we all know that phrase. Not only was it enshrouded, but it was then customized and codified as systemic racism in New Orleans and across the United States, with statues as the enduring symbols of that history. I'm going to invite each of you to talk about other ways that history is manifested in your respective cities, Louisville, my respective city, and how that inspires your efforts to remove the symbols.
You want me to go first?
You're
You
our
want me to
guest.
tell them my political thought you were the most interesting mayor?
Come on, you're just jealous.
I am.
I thought you were pretty interesting. This is one of the great mayors
I'm
the
not
country's
interesting.
ever seen
I'm
right
not
here.
interested at all. Anyway, thank you so much, and good luck to you. He's not the president yet, which means that he can get out of the way tonight and say whatever he wants and then not come back to haunt him in his new job. It's great to be with all of you. Thank you for having me. Pastor, thank you so much. Greg, thank you for having me. I want to say to all of you that, you know, a prophet is never revered in their own house, and sometimes familiarity breeds contempt. So if you're mad at the mayor for something, you know, like about the way you don't like things to work. My short stay here in 24 hours, 48 hours, I've been here a couple of times before. You live in a fabulous city.
Thank you.
This is really a great place. And Greg and I have been knowing each other for a long time, and I consider him to be a dear friend, but I'm telling you, he's a great mayor. And the leadership in this city, it's obvious, I can tell you from the communications that I've had since I've been here, this is an ascending city that's internationally renowned, that is going to lead the country in years to come. And I just report back to you from what I've heard from citizens in the last 48 hours, and I commend that to you because you have a great and wonderful platform to actually be a great example for the rest of the country in all of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight, the most important of which is race. So let me start at the beginning, which is to say clearly and unequivocally that this nation's great original sin was slavery. We have never really dealt with that in the appropriate way. We have tried to skate by it. We have tried to act as though somehow the consequences of slavery are not with us today. That's not true. We dance through history in a quick way. Like, yeah, I know there was slavery, and then there was Reconstruction, and there was Jim Crow, and there was a civil rights movement, and we had Barack, so dude, we are cool. That is not true. If you think about just the early language in our framing documents, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. That was written by somebody that actually owned slaves. And so it couldn't have possibly been that, notwithstanding that notion, that aspiration of becoming a more perfect union was an aspiration that we knew was going to take us many, many years to get to without really contemplating how hard it is. And unless we confront what was and know our true history and know our whole history and tell it, and it's all of our complexity, the United States of America will never, ever, ever, it's not capable of being the wonderful place that we all know it can be. Now, I say that on behalf of the greatest country that has ever been, and we have a lot to be proud of in this country, but so many people have gotten left behind. And as I travel around the country, as I have done in the last 7 months, now having gone to 25 southern cities, in an effort to try to find a way to help find a pathway to peace and to justice across race and across class, it occurs to me that there are things that we walk by every day and don't notice that are symbols of oppression and that are institutional designs of oppression. And my story about that came through the monuments. I'm born and raised in New Orleans. I'm a Southern boy. I love the South. I know we're a place of faith. We're a place of family. We're a place of country. We love barbecues. You know, we like all kinds of stuff about getting together. Music is a great coming together for us. And I'm very proud of the fact that I'm from the South. But there's some things about the South where we're not being honest with each other. And it's hurting us all. And so as I was tasked with rebuilding the city of New Orleans, we had gotten completely destroyed by Katrina. And by the way, thank you for your prayers, and thank you for the goodwill that you sent us, as well as the money to help us rebuild. But as we were rebuilding the city, 17 feet underwater, 1,800 fellow Americans killed, 250,000 homes destroyed. I mean, like, we were wiped out. We had to rebuild the city. And if you've ever been in a near-death experience, which many people in this room have been, you've had a parent that's died, a child with cancer, car accident, something. All you want is to close your eyes and pray and go back to like when it didn't happen and put it back right like it was, right? You know that feeling? Well, the city of New Orleans was in that space, and what we did that was miraculous, the people of the city, is they allowed themselves to stay in suspended agony, in delayed gratification, in order not to build the city back the way it was. Because as wonderful as the city of New Orleans was, in all of its iterations the night before Katrina hit, it wasn't great. It was descending. It was a city that in 1960 was bigger than Houston and bigger than Atlanta, but the night before Katrina had dropped dramatically. And so as we get decimated and we have to look at ourselves in the mirror, we have to start a little truth telling. And if we were going to build it back, the question is, well, who are we going to build it back for? Who got to come back and who had to leave? What did it look like? And we had to start thinking about, well, was it great before? So when people say they want to be great again, you might want to ask the question, was it great before? It's not a political question, it's a very thoughtful question. If you're going to go back someplace, it might be worthy to ask you, where are we going back to? So if you're going to build it back like it was, you might ask yourself, well, is that really what we want to do? And we came to the conclusion that we actually didn't want to build it back the way it was, that we wanted to find our true history. We wanted to be more of our real selves, and that what it was right before was not really authentically who we were, and we weren't living in truth. That what we wanted to do was build it back the way it should have been, if everybody would have had a shot at saying what it should have been, and if we would have gotten it right the first time. Now that's a mouthful, because that takes you into a whole lot of conversations you do not want to have at Thanksgiving dinner and at whatever holiday you might be having. So we start rebuilding the city because we had to rebuild our schools, we had to rebuild our health clinics, we had to rebuild everything. And as I got past my first term, and we started thinking about how we keep everybody engaged in the rebuilding of the city, because it's painful, costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, requires a lot of inconvenience, like sitting in traffic, streets not getting done, people get mad at the mayor because things ain't happening exactly the way they want. You don't know something about that, Simone. I started thinking about our 300th anniversary, which is in 2018, so in 2014. I started thinking about it, and I called my friend, because you do, mayors do this actually. I know y'all think we smart, but we know that we don't know everything. And so we call people who are smarter than us and ask us to help. And in this regard, it was Wynton Marsalis, who was my friend. And I said, man, you're the smartest guy I know. I know you're a musician, but that's just your medium. What you are is a historian. You use music to tell history through jazz, which, by the way, was created in New Orleans, and it was an accumulation of a lot of different cultures coming together, all different strands that created a whole new and different thing that was better in some than all of its parts. It sounds familiar? It should. It's called democracy and freedom, and that's what jazz is. And so Wynton says to me, hey man, he says, well, if you believe what you believe, and you believe what you say, and this is a city of integrity, and you want to build it back the way it should have been if it would have been right the first time, he says, you ought to think about taking that monument of Robert E. Lee down. No, I went, no. We're in a coffee shop, nobody's watching us. I'm like, hey man, come on. He says, no, he says, look, he says, have you ever thought about those monuments from our perspective? I walk by these things every day. No, I haven't. He says, well, you know, Louis Armstrong left here because of those. monuments. And when he said that, my brain almost exploded. It felt like my mama hit me in the head with a 2x4. And I was like, man, you know, the great diaspora. You know, that's right. 4 million people left the South because they weren't welcome. And our African-American brothers and sisters took their intellect, their talent, their raw material, everything they had, and became doctors and lawyers and astronauts and presidents and great baseball players, all of that stuff. And I thought to myself when he said, I said, man, you know, I know he's right. I can't tell him I know he's right, but I know he's right. And he said, well, look, just think about it. So I did start thinking about it. And it occurred to me after I did more research and made myself more knowledgeable that I was walking by a piece of institutional racism that was put up for the purpose of sending a message to black people that you are not welcome here. Robert E. Lee never really spent much time in New Orleans. And on top of that, the city of New Orleans was not really a Confederate town. So all of a sudden, all the historians that told me about my whole life about how we got to keep our history, that only represented 4 years of our history, and it was a misrepresentation of it, and it was put up in a specific way. In other words, it was designed to produce a result, and it did in fact succeed in producing the result that people who deserved to be there felt unwelcomed and left. And they were the worst for it, and we were the worst for it. And so as I started facing my reality, am I being an integral leader? Am I leading the city where it needs to lead? Do those monuments help us stand up or sit down? Are they just steel and are they metal? Or do they represent an attitude that's actually caused us to be smaller rather than bigger, more inclusive rather than exclusive, et cetera, et cetera? It became pretty clear to me that, you know, we weren't walking the walk, and we were talking the talk. And so I thought it was really important that as we were rebuilding this city, the way it should have been if we would have got it right the first time, there was no reason in our public spaces to be sending a message to a city that was majority African American, or any part African American for that matter, that not only are you not welcome and don't belong here, but this is not your city, because it was. And so I thought it was really important that we, and it's amazing that you said that just a minute ago with the Reverend that you introduced me to, call the question on this issue. Now that you know who put them up, now that you know why they were put them up, now that you know the history of why they were up there, and now that you said this is who you want to be, do those monuments reflect who we really are as a people, not only in the city of New Orleans, but in America? And I decided that I was going to ask the people of the city to take them down. We went through 2.5 years of a lot of difficult conversations. Eventually, after 2.5 years of arguing and going through the democratic process, and then 7 different lawsuits from 13 different judges, we got a green light to take them down. And I thought we were almost home, except when we actually tried to take them down. And then I realized something that was called de facto segregation, which is to say that I couldn't find anybody with a crane to take the damn monuments down, because everybody was scared. Because the first guy that showed up had his car firebombed. The first guy that wanted to help us do it. And so I'm the mayor. Thought I was a pretty powerful mayor. I thought I was good, actually. Building billions of dollars worth of projects. I can't find somebody to lend me a crane because they're scared. So in 2016, 17, 18, second decade, 21st century, in the United States of America, with the executive branch behind you, the legislative branch behind you, the judicial branch behind you, some people are like, still, hell no. We're going to do everything we can not to let that happen. And that is a reflection, my fellow Americans, of institutional racism, where people are saying, we are not going. And we had to send a clear message to America, of a very simple message that evidently some Americans have a very hard time hearing. Okay? And this is it. The Confederacy was on the wrong side of history and humanity. The Civil War was intended and fought to destroy the United States of America for the purpose of maintaining slavery and creating the dehumanization of our fellow Americans. Just that fact. Yes. Seems to be very hard. It should not, right now, that should not be a hard thing to say, and for a hard people to say, well, yeah, of course. And because we can't do that, it should indicate to you that permeating all of our lives, permeates the government, permeates the faith-based community, true that, as we would say in New Orleans, Every fabric.
Mortgage community.
Mortgage community.
Insurance community.
Insurance community. Transportation, where bus lines start and where they end. How neighborhoods are designed. How banks lend money. All of those kinds of things are actually stopping not only our fellow Americans from having access to what it is that they need and the ability and the opportunity to get what they deserve, but the fact that they can't have what they need and what they want, it's hurting the rest of us too. And to the white people in the room, I'm not looking at anybody in particular, I want you to contemplate just for a minute. Well, I'm not blaming anybody. I walked by those monuments for years and never thought about it. So, it's just part of I want you to contemplate how much you lost in opportunity because so many millions of people who are so wonderfully talented never got what they needed and took their talent someplace else and created value and added it to you, and you didn't get the benefit of it where we are right now. And how much further along the South would be today. We'd be lapping the rest of the nation with all the talent that we got because everybody doesn't have what they're entitled to. And those monuments, to me, reflect that mindset. And so if you want to redesign the nation, you might contemplate, when you ask why are things the way they are today, the fact that it was actually designed to produce that very thing. And if you want something different, you might want to think about what it would look like if we began to redesign it so that we all would have a chance to participate. And that is the broad impetus for the work that I did in the monuments and that what a lot of people around the country are doing. I'm going to turn it over to Greg, but he knows this already because he's been working on this from the perspective of a compassionate city. It's very, very similar. And this community has been helping lead that effort for a long, long period of time. So I'm thankful to talk about what the city of New Orleans is, but you guys know a lot about this already because you've given permission to each other to actually work in this space.
But before Mayor Fischer, before you speak, I want you to tell them the story about the little girl that's in you.
Okay. First of all, you should read the book.
I think it's for sale later.
You're welcome. I'm just trying to. It doesn't cost me. No. What happened was, Greg will confirm this. We have a certain face that we present to the public. You need to know that we're in control. We know what we're talking about. We're certain about it because we want you to follow us. But there are a lot of dark moments when we're by ourselves, and there's a lot of doubt and fear. Without getting to all the details, there are lots of threats to our families, and the social media stuff is awful. And it's not always easy when you're sitting there by yourself figuring out, man, did I do the right thing, or what the hell's going on? My city's gonna, And so, and before we do things, we spend a lot of time thinking about them before we actually say, yeah, and we try to get out a lot of stuff too. Because in my business, the squeeze is not always worth the juice. Y'all know what that means, right?
Yes.
And you can walk by a lot of things. You do this all the time. You're like, man, that person said something, I don't like it. And should I tell him that and get in a fight with him and ruin our relationship? All of that stuff. We go through that too. And so as I was thinking about taking the monuments down, so Wenton says to me, I'm your friend, look at it from our perspective. Louis Armstrong left. Can you take them down? I'm like, hell no, I'm not taking them down because they're not mine. And I'm not going to fight the legislature and the governor and all them crazy people. But then I found out they actually were mine. They were on land that the city owned. So I'm like, oh man, I don't know. And I don't need to ask the legislature, and I don't need to ask the governor, and I don't need to ask the president. Then I'm like, oh hell. Then you start thinking about, well, okay, if I'm gonna do it, how am I gonna get everybody, actually, I need to speak correctly, I'm sorry. How am I gonna convince the people of the city to do this thing, and when should we do it? So you're thinking about all of this stuff. And then to make sure that you're doing the right thing, you do what everybody does, is you get some friends together to try to get a good sense of the cross-section of the community. And I had a meeting, I had lots of meetings. I talked to Ken Burns, who's the great documentarian. I talked to the guy that knows more about Gettysburg than anybody else. I talked to the great historian, Walter Isaacson. But then I needed to talk to my friends, my people who knew me. And that meeting had African Americans, women, men, white people, blah, blah, blah. And to my great surprise, the room did not break down by race. Some of my older friends said, like your mama, baby boy, listen to me. Don't do that. Just add to it, don't take down. That's a big fight. African American older people, like, we got other things to do. White people, take them down. You gotta, and like projecting like crazy. Projecting white like all over the place. And then it just went all over. So, but one woman, African American woman, who was a senior executive at a big company, said she was not in favor of it and got in an argument with another African American woman who was a lawyer, who was a senior partner in the law firm, and we all sat there and watched these two African American women go back and forth about the pros and cons, and I was enjoying it. It was like WWE. They were having a great old time. And then about 2 weeks later, when we got that group together again, the African American woman who was the executive that was against it, she said, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. She goes, remember I told you last week I was against it? She goes, I'm for it now. And I said, really? I said, well, what happened? And she says, well, I live in another state now, but I'm from here. I had my 2 daughters with me, and we were driving down St. Charles Avenue, which is our main thoroughfare. Robert E. Lee's right in the middle of it. You would know that Robert E. Lee is on the only damn circle that we have in New Orleans, in the most prominent circle. We only got one circle in New Orleans, and he's like sitting right up there with his arms folded and looking like, I'm the boss. And she said, my little girl was sitting behind me with her looking at it, and she said, oh, mama, mama, mama. She said, that's really pretty. That thing's beautiful. What is that? And she said, baby, she says, that's a statue of Robert E. Lee. She says, really? She says, who was Robert E. Lee? She said, well, he was a great general. No, really? What war did he fight in? So, well, baby, he fought in the Civil War. She says, oh, mama, that was the war, about slavery. She said, yeah, exactly. She said, well, he fought in the war. She goes, yeah. She goes, what side did he fight for? And she goes, well, he fought for the Confederacy. And she said, mama, wasn't that the side that wanted to keep me a slave? And she said, yeah, that's exactly right. And then there was dead silence. And then she said this, well, mama, why is he up there? And she couldn't answer the question. She could not answer the question. So I tucked that away. And 2 years later, after I talked to tons of people and myself started thinking about, man, I've been trying to get out of this. I don't want to do this. This is going to hurt. What was I going to tell my grandchildren? Or if I really was the mayor who wanted to prepare the city for the future, which meant lifting up young people, primarily young African-American girls, how was I going to tell her that since I was her protector and I was the one that was supposed to lay the groundwork for her going forward, that guy was up there to encourage her to be whatever it is that she thought she could be? And when I realized that I couldn't do it, that story about how are you going to look this little girl in the eye, explain it to her in front of me about why you're taking down history, why it was put up there before, why it needs to be there because it can't be anyplace else, why it's in a space of reverence rather than remembrance with another thing. Explain it to her and ask yourself, was that monument put there to lift her up or to push her down, to push her forward or to pull her back, to give her encouragement or to tell her that she was less than human? And then ask yourself what the people of New Orleans thought they really were and what the people of America really stood for. Well, in that moment, it really comes pretty clear. There's really not much of an argument anymore about what it is that you're supposed to do. And so one of the things that we learn in the business that we're in, even though we talk in politicalese and we talk in these big terms and we talk about budgets, we talk about the impact that our decisions have on individual people's lives because that's what we're supposed to do. And if we find a way, and this is not easy, and we don't always do it, and as I said, sometimes we skate and sometimes we push aside. If you find the courage of your convictions in the moment of truth, when you have clarity, you can go to a whole nother place. Especially when you know you're going to get spanked. So people ask me all the time, did you ever get scared? I was scared all the time. But to be truthful to you, my hand to God, when I was in my office and I was really afraid, and there were many, many days, I thought about John Lewis at a very specific moment when he was 23 on the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Y'all have seen this picture, and he's about to get whooped by that sheriff. He knew he was going to take a lick. And you know what? He didn't move. And the little bit that I went through compared to what he went through and all the other people that went before me, at the end of the day, it really was not that hard of a choice. Once you get through all the lack of clarity and get through all your fear and get through in the scope of everything that we've done in history. But it has now led to a different place for me, because now I'm starting to see things that I walk by all the time that have always been there. And it's called implicit bias. It's called a criminal justice system that is not structured the right way. It's called a bonding system that puts people in jail that shouldn't be there, who are awaiting trials for non-serious offenses that shouldn't be there. It's called redlining. This is what's called institutional racism that people don't really think about. It's called a bus line that stops at the end because they don't want people to be able to get into that neighborhood. So when you want to know why people don't have a job, it's because they can't get there. And so when white people say, man, you know about those black schools, you know the parents don't ever show up. Man, at the white schools, we always there. You know why? Because you got a job that allows you to leave your job, and you got a car that allows you to get to your school stuff, and you got money to pay for enrichment programs for your kids. That's why. That's why. And so if you open up, just be open to the possibility. That's all. Be open to a different possibility, that it's functioning exactly like it was designed. And ask yourself, if you had a chance to design it again, whether you would do that so you would produce a different result that was just and fair and peaceful and good for you, would you do it? And the answer to the question is yes, you would do it, then you ought to start. And that's it. Because if you don't start, you're never going to get there. I think y'all have already started in Louisville, but in this country, we have begun. Not just now. People have been trying to do this forever. We're standing on the shoulders of thousands of people that have gone before us. But it keeps running into a roadblock that doesn't move us further along than we should be. And I just think it would be better for the country if we confronted this, recognize, acknowledge, apologize. I'm sorry. I forgive you. That's an important part of reconciliation too. Now let's go through, not, oh, we're finished. Now let's go through like you do with reconciliation in your families in order to get us to a different place. And let's then specifically begin to build a bridge, a real bridge to a real place. Not just some kind of, oh yeah, I'll get there later when, no, a real bridge to a real place that we know is going to look like, and design a system that works for us all, and the country is going to be a better place because of it. You know that. You already know that. Question is, are you willing to pay the price to do it? And I would say we should be able to pay the price, because the squeeze here will be well worth the juice for the country.
Mayor Fischer?
That's what I think. Sorry.
So a couple things on that. One is white folks in particular, you know, demographics are destiny. I think I once heard somebody say that. And so when you look at where our country is, we're going to be a majority non-white country by the year 2040 or so anyway. So there's a very practical aspect of dealing with these legacy issues as well. Our country is changing. The strength of our country is its diversity. So from a moral standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, it behooves all of us to move into this as quickly as we can. So there's those practical aspects on top of what you had to say. So I guess we're all talking about our monument war stories, so we'll talk about Louisville. You know, the first episode of our chapter was the Confederate monument on the University of Louisville's campus. And started talking about that in April of 2016. There's a couple things readily apparent from Mitch's story. Louisville is a very different city from New Orleans. We are the northernmost southern city, southernmost Midwestern city. The views of our city around racism are not nearly as deeply as entrenched as what New Orleans is because of where it is in the Deep South. I mention that because of the reaction of the people in our city to the removal of the Confederate monument. The other thing that's apparent is that you're much more democratic than I am when it came to removing our statue. Ours was like, we owned the land that it was on, we're going to move it. The staff said, okay, let's do this. had some great assistance along the way. University of Louisville was a great partner. Jim Ramsey was up for the task. Dr. Ricky Jones at U of L was invaluable in terms of the support and coaching throughout the process. Because as you go through these things, it's very delicate. If you push too hard here, sometimes something happens over here that stops what your objective is. So how do you move through this while you're provoking, stimulating, but not to the point where the thing shuts down, because you've got an objective. In this case, the objective was the removal of the monument. It took a little, I got a little more basic with some people on this. Now, there were some white people in our community that were telling me that we should not move the statue, the monument. And I guess you and I must have been talking about that time, because I was saying, how do you explain this? Because what hit me was when I'm talking to all the black students at the University of Louisville that are walking by this monument every day, basically monuments saying from the white population, we're still in charge, and big. These things are designed to be big, to intimidate, to look down on you, to send this message. And so for our white community in particular, for those that said we don't really need to move this, I took it to a more basic level. I said, imagine if you're walking by that statue and you're holding the hand of your little daughter and she asks you, Daddy, what's that statue for? And she says, well, that's there to commemorate these folks that perpetrated slavery upon this nation. Well, tell me about slavery, Daddy. He said, well, that's when some white folks could come into our house and take your mother away, and they just bought her on the spot, and she's going down the river, and your sister, she was bought like that too. She said, you mean our family was just broken up like that and we didn't have anything to do about it? Yeah, that's right. They said they probably raped your mother too, and your sister, for the whole trip down the Mississippi River. She said, and there's a monument to those people? And when I said that to the white folks, a couple of folks said, I got it. But a whole bunch of them said, that's not what that statue's about. So their point of view was, it's extolling veterans and all these other things. But when you boil these things down, it's about power of one human being over another human being and the ability to do anything you want to that human being. And if that does not stir your moral core as to the wrong-headedness of that, then I don't know what would be. And that's what that represented to me. And so I said, and we were in a different place here in our city, where people are like, well, okay, you want to move it, you can move it. We got through the whole argument, and you're trying to erase history. No, we're not trying to erase history. We're just trying to move a monument. We're not, they said, Fischer's the Taliban. We're not blowing it up. We're just moving it. So we went through that whole process and started in March of 16. We were sued because the guy said, city doesn't own it, you can't move it. It's also in a preservation district, so you can't move it. We got through those quickly and then moved it toward the end of 2016. Brandenburg wanted it. We put a request for proposals out of people that might want this statue. They wanted it because they have a collection of Civil War monuments down there, and that's their tourism strategy. So off it goes. It was shipped where? Down the river.
Down the river.
Okay. So that was our one and only most prominent Confederate monument, if you would, in the city. Then we put together a commission to study public arts and monuments and come up with some other recommendations, because there were two other monuments in our city. One was the George Prentice statue, which is literally 50 yards right outside from where we're sitting right here. Prentice was a know-nothing leader of their party, co-founder of the Courier-Journal. His diatribes of anti-immigration, hatred of the Irish and the German, which I'm Irish and German, by the way, led to Bloody Monday in Louisville in 1855, where the Protestants turned on the Irish and the Germans, chased 22 of them into a church, burned it to the ground. Nobody was defending him, okay? So he's been moved, and he's in a place we won't identify. And then we have the Castleman statue. Castleman, it's funny, a lot of people see Castleman as a very nuanced statue. It's a beautiful statue. This guy started the American Saddlebred Association, so he sits prominently above the saddlebred horse. He's dressed in civilian garb, not military garb. Your most extreme Confederate monuments are men on horses in military and Confederate regalia with their guns pointing to the north with the horse bucked up. I mean, that's the most extreme type. So Castleman has a lot of nuance to a lot of people. They're saying that's not a monument to the Confederacy. In his biography, Castleman extolled his time as part of Morgan's Raiders. Really, that was a highlight of his adult life, as he writes it in the Civil War. Now, he was pardoned. He came back and he fought in the Union Army, had a distinguished career in our city, helped with our park system, etc. So some people, you can make an argument that, you know, it's nuanced, it's part of the city, he should stay. And it's certainly a very prominent feature of the Cherokee Triangle. But the bottom line for me came down to, would that statue be welcomed in every neighborhood of our city? And clearly the answer is no. So just because it's in one part of the city doesn't mean it's okay. Everybody in our city should feel welcome to look at a piece of public art and appreciate what it is and not be offended by what it stands for. So as you all may know, we're caught up into this whole system right now. We're in the final stages, hopefully, of being able to move Castleman with the final review. That should be coming up here in the next couple of months or so. And then I hope then with the approval of the Cave Hill Cemetery Board, we'll trot him down to Cave Hill, and then he'll be by the family plot down there. So again, not destroying, just removing. Now you asked, the original question is, what are we doing today? So I'll just quickly leap forward to today and say, are these issues still with us? Absolutely they are. And we'll talk later about probably gaps in education and all this. But when you think about our Russell neighborhood, for instance, Russell neighborhood, everybody knows it's just west of 9th Street, immediately adjacent to downtown. The Russell neighborhood was once known as the Harlem of the South because of its richness and beauty of black-owned businesses, nightclubs, restaurants. So people from all over this part of the country would come and spend time in Louisville at the Harlem of the South. What happened? Why isn't it there anymore? Primarily urban renewal, government-sanctioned renewing of our cities. Translation, when the black folks and their businesses got too close to the white downtowns, got to make sure that doesn't happen. That was the story of urban renewal throughout our country. In fact, there's the so-called father of city planning, a guy named Harlan Bartholomew, worked in 70 cities in our country. And part of the design principles of that firm were to make sure that the black population does not encroach too closely on the white downtown. So when you go to a city and they'll say, what's on the other side of the tracks, or on the other side of Martin Luther King Boulevard, or west of 9th Street, these were intentional city design practices to keep people segregated, institutionalized racism. Redlining practices. How do most of us build wealth? Through owning a home, selling a home, passing it down through the generations. The fact that because of your skin color, through redlining, you were largely incapable of buying a home is what explains why the average net worth of a white family is 15 times that of a black family today. So these are the results of these systems that Mitch are talking about. So we can't change that. Our jobs is to affect today and affect what we're doing tomorrow, so it changes. So when you look at the renaissance that's going on in Russell right now with the featured terrace redevelopment, mixed income, mixed use, and the $1 billion that's going in West Louisville right now, that was one of my original goals of our administration, was to stop the depopulation and the de-investment that's been taking place in West Louisville since when? 1937. That's when the Great Flood took place and when people started leaving. Think about that, 82 years. So the good news is we're started. The bad news is it's taken way too long. But the important things are, what are we doing today?
You heard where I did my PhD. It's not a university that's popular here in this area. But while I was at that institution, it's a 4-letter word. While I was there, I took courses at UNC Chapel Hill, which of course has Silent Sam. And if you know anything about what's taking place across the country, Silent Sam has been one of the great controversies, not only in higher education, but with respect to the whole issue of monuments and statues. The removal took place recently. The repercussions continue. But Chapel Hill also did something very interesting. A number of years ago, before Silent Sam came down, they also erected a memorial called, and many people don't know this because it doesn't even get discussed, it's called the Unsung Founders Memorial. And this memorial, right there on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill, is a memorial recognizing the contributions of people of African descent who literally, with their hands, with their blood, their sweat, and tears, built a university that they could not attend. So the question that I want to raise here is, it's a very simple one. We know that there's the story of the hunter and the lion. And we know that the hunter gets his or her story told because they have the capacity to write and tell the story. The lion, no matter how mighty, does not have that capacity, and so only the story of one side ends up being explained. Where are we not only removing monuments, relocating statues, but where are we also erecting new monuments and new statues that speak to those whose voices have been largely silenced?
Yep. Well, let's talk about the physicality part of that question first, and then let's move that into another aspect of it. So Lean Into Louisville, you all heard about. That was prompted by what took place in Charlottesville about 18 months or so ago. And I'd like to ask you all to think about how you felt when you watched those images from Charlottesville on TV or on the web, whatever it might be. Neo-Nazis, Klansmen, a president that says there's fine people on both sides of this. And if you're like me, you had this bile form that just said, this is not America. Now, Katie Dalinger, who's here, my deputy chief of staff, said, well, it's not who we want to be. It is who we are right now. And I think we all must remember that. So coming out of that was this whole Lean Into Louisville initiative that will be hopefully for the rest of the time I'm mayor, which is conversation, dinner table conversations, large lectures like this, to educate people about the roots of discrimination. And most of the time when people learn about them, they start opening up their minds. Much like when white people hear about white privilege for the first time. That's a difficult conversation for a lot of white folks to have. It's like, wait a minute, I've worked really hard to get what I've gotten, so I don't think I have any privileges. That's not what white privilege is. And so when you start unpacking that, what I've seen is when they show up the second time and the third time to understand what white privilege is all about, all of a sudden they become part of the solution, a solution of more equity and access for everybody, especially non-white people. So Lean Into Louisville also has a public art component to it, Alton, that's about creating public art that's not about people that look like me, that has a more full representation of what the stories of our community are all about. Now, the real work needs to be done in the classroom. When we take a look at where our biggest gaps are in our classrooms across the country, it's with young black boys. Not young black girls, young black boys. Raj Chetty, who's the foremost public economist that works in the area of demographics, census, income. He's the gold-plated guy to help understand that. And he's pulled this down to 3 things. What's the difference in a community where there's young black boys that are prospering versus communities that are not prospering? And then how do we design our cities to make sure we're addressing those issues? Number 1 factor, there's 3. Number 1, are there adequate opportunities for those young boys in the community to see a world outside of that neighborhood? So often what we see with young men that are in violence, they have a very small view of what the world can be. So when there's opportunities, whether it's out of school time work, whether it's our summer works program for summer jobs, mentees, whatever it might be, all of a sudden a much bigger world opens out there. So that's the number 1 issue. Second issue has to do with fatherhood. Not necessarily fathers in the household, but an adequate ratio of fathers in the neighborhood so that these young guys can see older guys that can say, I can be like him. I can be a doctor, I can be a lawyer, I can be a teacher, I can be a policeman. So there's the modeling aspect of that. And the third aspect, which this is part of what we're trying to do tonight, is to build a culture of racial inclusivity in a city. So if you've got a business and you're looking at 2 people, they're the final position for a job, there's DeQuan over here and there's David over here, let's hire DeQuan. Versus, well, I don't know about DeQuan. You know, he might. So do we have a culture, and how do you build a culture in a city where people are like, we need to address these issues, we need to make sure that our values are around equity. When you ask the question, what can I do? You say, well, I've got a business. I'm not doing enough business with minority enterprises. That's a specific action that I can take, or my church can take, or my temple can take. So those are 3 issues that we're working on in the city every day, too. Because this isn't something where we snap our fingers and all of a sudden tomorrow's a better day. It is a journey we're on, but cities and people, I won't even use the word courage. Makes it sound like it's noble. It's not. You have to be able to face yourself, because it's a liberating process, right? It's like having an old dirty closet and you're trying to clean the thing out and it's been bothering you for years because it's got all this crap in it. You know, and once you get it all out, it feels great. And this is the same issue when you address these issues, that through history, through the way that you were born, that you've got this junk inside of your head that's led to inequitable treatment and discrimination and prejudice that none of us can be proud about. But clearing all that out is a wonderful process, and it takes time, and it brings us together. And when we realize that this interdependence is what our real treasure is as a country, that's a great place to be. And I think America right now is looking for cities that demonstrate innovation, demonstrate compassion, and demonstrate equity. And one of our goals, and I think the goals of people here tonight, are for us to be one of those cities so that we can show the rest of the world that we're really trying. We're never going to be perfect, but this is a mission that we're on.
So I ditto everything that Greg said, but let me go backwards and start at a place where he started before. It is in your selfish interest to prepare yourself for the year 2040. Because you are not going to stop the demographic trends that are occurring. It would be as though I, the mayor of the city of New Orleans, saw a hurricane coming, or something happening with the land, or something coming positively or negatively, and I never told you about it. And we never prepared ourselves for it. What is going to occur in 2040 is the United States of America is going to be majority minority. Just is. Now, you can either get mad at that and try to isolate yourself and act like you don't want it to happen, or you can say, how do I position myself to take advantage of what's coming my way? And how do I get the best and the brightest people in the world out of that group of people to come here, rather than to say to them, no, you're not welcome, because they're going somewhere. And if they don't feel welcome and they don't feel included, and there's no way for them to have upward mobility, you're not going to get it either. I don't know of one organization in my whole life, today even, that has become more exclusive and more not diverse, that is doing better than any organization that has become inclusive and more diverse. Not one. I just don't know. So like if you want to hang out in that environment, God bless you, but it's not going to bode well for you. So in this competition of demography is destiny, the other thing that's happening is people are moving into cities. So they're coming here. 85% of the people in America will be living in cities in 2040, 85%. Now, I don't want you to hear that rural areas are not important. They're critically important, and by the way, we're more interdependent. All the food that you eat is coming from there. And it's critically important that we understand that we need to nurture each other. But the fact of the matter is you do have to prepare yourself physically for more people coming in, which means that you have to think about how you design roads, how you design schools, just the functionality of it all. And then there's a talent hunt. And secondly, if you have people here that are wonderfully talented and you're not taking advantage of that talent and you're leaving it behind, then you're going to suffer as well. I spent 2 hours today with some of the most spectacular human beings I've ever met that are young people that live in the West End. And let me just tell you something. You got like unbelievable talent in this city. And these kids who were from 7 years old to 19, they see so much. They know. They know where opportunity is. They can see they're getting left behind. They can tell you, even though they can't quote Raj Chetty, the deficit they know, they see it. And there's so much talent there already here before you even think about the people that are coming. And the cities that are open and inclusive, that are innovative, that are creative, that understand how to take this thing bourbon, that y'all have bourbon? Y'all have that? And actually begin to add value to it and understand that, creative, wonderful, beautiful, tech, et cetera, those are the places that are going to quote unquote win. And the places that are going to lose are the places that are exclusive, that stay small, that don't innovate and hide their head in the sand. That's just an economic fact. And it happens to also be a cultural fact, and it happens to be a spiritual fact, and it happens to be a fun fact. That if you want to be a place that's a lot more fun and enjoyable, where there's community cohesion, where there's art and there's music and we're all playing together like we did when we were kids, you need to get yourself ready for that. So that's part A. Part B is, and I'll take this from the physicality of the monuments that Greg talked about into the institutional changes the same way, that your public spaces are very limited. Mostly what you have is private spaces, but in your public spaces, your Olmsted Parks, you got a bunch of those, right? You got spaces downtown where people go. When you take down a monument, you don't get rid of history, you open up the possibility for all of history. So those Confederate monuments, for example, only represented 4 years of our history. The Civil War was 1861 to 1865. If you thought that history and the placing of public things was actually a good idea, if you thought that, then you might think, well, what would it look like if we represented all of our history in its beauty and told it in a complex way? Then what would that create? And so now you have limited space being occupied by a few people who are trying to hurt somebody for a short period of time. When you take that monument down and you say, okay, we're still going to preserve that space for history, what then could you put up? And think about whether or not you could put something up that was unifying rather than one that was dividing you. And I would argue with you strenuously. Mayors do a lot of things, but one of the things we think about is design. And ask yourself whether this city is designed to produce a really great result. I'm talking about how the streets go. I'm talking about how buildings are built. I'm talking about design and function, because they all matter in how we feel. And ask yourself whether the city and those spaces that are being occupied by a little bit of history could be occupied by a whole part of history. All right, number two. Number three, and this goes back to the really tough stuff that's going to be harder for us, is if all you do is mess around with public spaces that have some kind of metal and concrete that manifests itself in a public piece of art, and you don't get to the attitude that allowed those monuments to stand, you will not have done much other than to aesthetically change the way the city looks. And so what Greg is trying to say to you guys, particularly the white people in the room, and I say it that way, forgive me for just being so racially blunt, but we have to begin to understand and not just push back right away when somebody says institutional racism. Oh no, there's not in my life. I'm really a good person. I have a black friend. Y'all know, y'all understand? You know, or no, I don't, again, white privilege. The first time I heard it, it pushed me back. And I was like, wait, you know, I'm woke. And try to get somebody to understand from a young person's perspective what this really feels like. So I had a conversation with a woman in, where was I? Lake Providence, in the middle of the Delta. So I've been through Appalachia, I went through the Delta, I went to London County, Kentucky. It's not too far, right? Dog Patch. I was in Dog Patch. I got a hat in Dog Patch. You think that's funny, huh? So I asked this woman, I said, do you think that you benefit from white privilege? She was a teacher. She goes, I do not. I don't. She says, I have a lot of African-American friends. Same thing you said. I worked hard for everything that I have. I have personal responsibility, blah, 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 blah. I said, all right. I said, let me ask you a question. Where do you live again? She said, on this side of the lake. I said, well, who's on the other side of the lake? Same people who are on the other sides of the tracks or the highway. And I said, okay, well, thank you for that. I said, now let me ask you a question. I said, if you were out one night and you left your teenage son home and he had a party with his friends and they were smoking weed, not that your son would ever do that, or they were getting ruckus and the police showed up, I said, what would the sheriff do? And she said, well, he would call me, tell me to come get my son. I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what he would do. I said, that's what happens, right? Not that your son ever got in trouble. And she said, yeah, that's happened. I said, well, on the other side of the lake, if there was a party and some kids were smoking weed or they were doing something, what would the sheriff do? And she said, well, the sheriff would lock them up. I said, in that instance, who got the benefit of the doubt? And she said, my son did. I said, well, that's white privilege. And she goes, oh, I didn't know that's what you were talking about. And she was being honest. She was being honest. So for those of us who are not really fully understanding institutional racism, you're like, man, this is implicit bias, institutional racism. Man, it's like a ghost. Like, no, it's not a ghost. See, it's a specific real thing. Like, not that anybody happened, but maybe when in the 1950s, who remembers the GI Bill? Great piece of legislation. A lot of people benefited from it. But you know what? A lot of white folks took that and moved out to the suburbs and left neighborhoods, and not everybody got the benefit of that. It was a great piece, had unintended consequences, but think about just what happened there, whether it was intended or not intended. Think about back in the day when y'all used to go down to the bank because you knew who the lending officer was because he was your mama's or your daddy's friend, and it was like, we need to, get some money so we can buy our first house. And they said yes to you. And your credit wasn't great, but they gave you the benefit of the doubt. That didn't happen with African-American families. It was like, no, they don't get the benefit of the doubt. And then there was redlining. And then there are a whole bunch of other things, as Greg said, the design of neighborhoods. This is certainly true in New Orleans. I don't live here, but I'm guessing that it's kind of true here. That neighborhoods were designed in a way so that people couldn't actually drive all the way through them because it would be too hard, that would be too easy for people who were going to rob somebody to hit them on the head and keep going before the police could catch them. So you made it hard to get through the neighborhoods. You have to be in the neighborhood to know which way to go to get out, right? Does that sound familiar? Or if there are people that moved across the lake or across the river, there's no public transportation that gets over there because you know what? You really don't want it to be easy for those people to get over here easily. Well, those things are the kinds of things that you limit mobility, you limit access. If you limit opportunity, you limit hope. And so again, if you go back and think about these things without worrying about whether you're going to get blamed. So let me kind of talk about white people saying, I don't want to keep talking about this. Why do we keep going on it over and over? I did not own slaves. I don't know anybody that owned slaves. And why y'all keep talking to me? Okay? We could spend a lot of time talking about fault And I do think it's important for us as a country to acknowledge what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and to just for the one time, just say it was terribly wrong and it should have never occurred. And to say collectively, we are sorry. You all don't have to be personally at fault in order to be now responsible, partly, for fixing what it is that we broke. That's called reparations. No, I'm not trying to cause a riot. There are lots of different ways to talk about reparations, but when you hear the word, you go, oh my God, that's radical. I don't want to talk about that. Let me just kind of talk about it just kind of in a simple way, to let you know that it's not actually a radical idea, that in American jurisprudence, I am a lawyer by training and in the civil code from Louisiana, but we actually have an article in our code that regulates how people pay people back for damages that they did to them. It is incumbent upon whoever it is that injured a person to repair the damage that they did. And that is the thing, that if you get in a car accident, somebody runs into the back of your car, that's the article that you use to say, wow, you ran into the back of my car. You need to give me the money, that it costs to fix what it is that you broke. And if you broke my car and the damage was $20,000 because you hit me really hard, you can't just say, I'm gonna pay for the brake light and expect that person to say everything is okay, right? We see this all the time. If you break something, your mama taught you this, you're supposed to fix it. If you made it dirty, you're supposed to clean it up. So this notion somehow that it is like out of the blue that we should repair the damage that we did. Now, there is a strong argument that people make to say, yeah, but I didn't do anything personally, and so why should I be personally responsible? And I don't want to do the most extreme thing of that. There's a big argument to be made about that. But there are things that we can do as a country to institutionally begin to repair the design that has produced the result. To me, this is just my personal opinion, I'm not an elected official anymore, I'm an unemployed hack politician. To me, it seems to me that there's room to at least have that conversation. Not, oh, hell no, I like y'all and everything, but I'm not having that talk. I would just submit to you, like I said about the monuments, this is worth having a conversation about to see where it takes us. That is not so dramatically different from anything that we have ever done in this country. As a matter of fact, there's great precedence for the notion that we should repair the damage that we did. We collectively, and oh, by the way, even though we didn't live back then, okay, we are all part of a continuous government that has been in complete and total operation from that time to this, and things we did back then are affecting what we're doing now. So just like we correct what was wrong, we make straight what was crooked, we fix what was broken, we do that every day. But somehow when it comes to the issue of race, we white folks, man, our ears close, our eyes close, and this is so painful a discussion, we can't have it, which is why I say that I would at least be prayerful and open to the possibility that we could actually have the discussion and go through it and finally repeat what I said a little bit earlier. I am sorry, but here's the other side, and this is hard too. The I forgive you's got to come as well. In other words, there's got to be a time when we in this country go, okay, we really did it. We really had the conversation. We really addressed it. We have collectively dealt with it and reconciled it, knowing that we're not ever going to get to that more perfect union that the president reminds us about. But actually, we have to create a process to get us to that point. It can't be in a year. It can't just take 2 years. This is going to take us a long time to do. But unless and until we acknowledge the notion, and to me it's very simple, and I'll end with this. The mayor said this earlier, and I couldn't agree with him more. Diversity is our strength. That is our nation's calling card. That is who we are. Out of many, we are one. E pluribus unum. That is as American as anything else that there is. And the question that we have to ask ourselves in this country is, we're talking the talk, but are we really willing to walk the walk? And I happen to think it's a great walk that we should have together, I think it's going to take us to a place that we've never been before, that's going to be dramatically different and better. But here's the big point that I would like to make. That is in the future. It's not back there. It's not gone back anywhere, because I'm not going back there. I'm just telling all of y'all, I'm not going back there. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go to the comma again place. I want to go to where we should have been if we wouldn't have gotten it right the first time. That's where I want to go. I think that's a better place.
Hey, Alton. One thing I want to be sure we talk about in here before we go is the importance of historically black colleges and universities, in particular Simmons College here in Louisville, and why it's so important that that is a thriving institution in Louisville. Dr. Powell, you have a long history with HBCUs, so I'd like to ask you, what do you see the role of HBCUs in this whole journey of our country in producing a more equitable country? And particularly some comments on Simmons.
HBCUs are foundational. HBCUs are indispensable. HBCUs are essential. I am not only a product of one, so is my wife, so is my son, so is my daughter. And when our grandson is old, he will be a product of one. He doesn't know it yet. In all seriousness, every community of racial, ethnic descent, no matter who they are, must have grounding institutions. We must have grounding symbols. We must have grounding recognitions. And in this society of e pluribus unum, I'm going to differ for just a moment. I don't believe in diversity. I believe in inclusivity. I believe in equity. Much deeper, much vaster, much more profound. Diversity has been a term that has typically come from people of privilege who have made determinations now that we're going to invite others in. Inclusivity begins with a recognition that all of us have equal starting points already, and we have something of merit and worth that we bring to each other in equitable exchange. So I just want to note that. Simmons College is an absolute jewel. Mayor Fischer, I've only been here 7 months, but I have gained a profound respect for Dr. Kevin Cosby, for the work that is going on, at Simmons, that he literally, in Lazarus fashion, brought that institution back from the grave. And it is one of, I think, the most proud recognitions that this city ought to have, that Simmons, one of the rare historically black institutions in this state, is now becoming recognized across the country for the good that it is doing. I will simply say that Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, this fall, we have 2 new students coming from Simmons College.
Oh, right.
We have never had a robust connection with Simmons. We're changing that right now.
Thank you.
We are working with our colleagues at Simmons to develop a new joint degree program as well. And so I'm very excited to know that partnering opportunities exist. If you have never set foot on an HBCU, if you've never been to Simmons College, I encourage you, I beseech you, I implore you, make your way. Because if you want to see inclusivity in action, go to where Mayor Landrieu was talking about people apologizing and then waiting for the recognition. My experience with Black and Brown America is that we have been forgiven a whole lot of people for a long time, people who oftentimes have not even apologized for what they've done. I want you to hear me. If we are going to get past the impasse, if we are going to build bridges that lead to somewhere, then we better decide that we are going to take each other seriously as we are and where we are. And this includes the fact of this. And if I can recognize the magnificence in you, in your fact, recognize the same in mine. And let us do the work together.
So one last point. So if you're sitting here tonight saying, I feel like I need to do something, and you don't know what to do, go online to Simmons College and make a little contribution.
Amen.
Okay? That just be one thing that you could do tonight. Simmons College.
Do we have time for if we can go through two quickly?
Quickly.
Yeah, I have no idea. Paul, are these in a particular order? Just go through the top? Okay.
Did you pick them, Paul? All right.
With the symbolism of monuments and representing our attitudes towards our society, where did cemeteries fall on the priority list when rebuilding the city? What do the conditions of our cemeteries say about our cities? That's good.
That's a really good question from somebody that knows cemeteries. Because there's a big difference in cemeteries. Okay, the city fathers, white fathers back in the day, the most prominent cemetery in our city is Cave Hill Cemetery. If you go to Cave Hill Cemetery, it's a national arboretum. It's beautifully kept. It has diversity now, which is good, but it's beautiful. If you go to some of our other cemeteries in town that were largely occupied by African Americans, not only could they be unkempt, but they could have been run by scoundrels who sold the plots multiple times to multiple people. You're supposed to keep, I think it's like 15% of the money that you get as a cemetery in an endowment fund so you can keep it in good shape. That money is all gone. And then the cemetery is run over with weeds. And now, it's not our responsibility legally, but it's our moral responsibility to keep these up. So you can see such a huge difference in wealth and privilege, all the way to the graveyard. And that's a really interesting question there. Yeah.
Two questions really, really quickly. This one's to the mayor, Mayor Fischer. We acknowledge the need to rebuild the West End, to rebuild or support the West End. How do the budget cuts being discussed affect these needs? Is there no way to see that the population most oppressed does not suffer more from those cuts than the wealthier citizens?
Yeah. I appreciate that question.
You want me to You want me to deflect for that?
No, I love questions like that. There's no way for me to put a happy face on what the Metro Council voted on 2 weeks ago, and it was the majority. There were a whole bunch of Metro Council people that I agreed with, and that is, look, we've got this problem because of the Kentucky retirement system. That's a $50 million pension problem. Nothing we did wrong, but it's been put on our city to deal with. So we could either say, okay, we got to deal with this by raising revenue because our citizens deserve a basic level of services. Government is, as John Yarmouth says, how we organize our responsibilities to each other. Some people don't need any city services to speak of. Other people do. Just because of the situation they were born into, they didn't necessarily pick where they were born into, but for whatever reason, they need more city services. And that's what government does. It lifts us all up, hopefully, so we have a chance to succeed and reach our human potential. The refusal of the council to create revenue to help us keep our basic city services in line is very difficult because most of the people that get city services are our most vulnerable populations. So as we go through this exercise now, and I've got to produce a budget by April 25th to present to the council, my emphasis is on making sure that the most vulnerable are protected and that we continue to provide basic city services. But make no mistake, there's cuts all across the city in all departments as well. And having a strategy of hoping that nothing bad happens, or hoping that your ambulance shows up on time or that your firefighter shows up on time is not a good strategy. And government is different than other organizations in that we have to be there to respond to the peaks. When there's a hepatitis A outbreak, we got to be ready for that. When there's an opioid crisis, we got to be ready for that, whatever it might be. So I'm hoping that as the community sees this, that they shout loud and clear, this is not who we are. Look, we aspire to be a great American city. You don't do that trying to get by on the cheap. And when you've got a city that's in the top decile of performance by outside organizations, both financially and efficiency, which we are, we should be proud of that as a city, you got to say, hey, maybe we got to come to the table a little bit more. People say, you're a business guy, you should be able to figure it out. Here's what a business person would do. Well, okay, we can cut a little bit, but we've had a 14% increase in the cost of our business. That's what the additional pension costs are. I don't know any business that increases the cost 14% without having a price increase. Okay, and a price increase means a little bit more for taxes. So we're going to do the best we can to protect everybody, and that's my mission. But as I said, I can't just say everything's going to be okay, folks. I need you all to be loud and clear with your council people. We've got one here, Brandon Cohen, who I appreciate your support throughout this. Sherry Bryan Hamilton here is past councilwoman. I know how you would have voted for this, but I need you to contact the council people, because the anti-tax people, the talk radio folks, are very loud. You know, and we had anti-tax people calling in from all over the country, and they influenced a lot of the council people because they did not hear from enough people that said we need to provide basic city services. So if you sit on the sidelines, you get what we're going to be happening here in a couple months. So it's a challenge that, in my view, we kind of shot ourselves in the foot, and we'll keep moving forward. We got great momentum as a city, but this did not help us.
This is an easy question. Two people asked, any chance you are running for president?
Come on, Mitch.
First of all, thank you. My mother thanks you. But no, not this time.
Okay.
I just said no. Why you want to keep wanting?
You said no.
Okay, I'm sorry. No. But I want to help my friend here without getting into y'all's personal business in Louisville. All you Louisvillians. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
I practiced like for 8 hours. I heard this a lot in my city, and it's amazing to me how smart people listen to things that people say and don't go, that's really stupid. Like one of them is less is more. No, it's not. Less is less. I mean, like we say that, like things all the time. It's like, wait, what? What did you say again? Less is less. More is more. I'll just say this the way I say it in my neighborhood. You feel me? Okay, so just when you're running a city, I would just echo this what Greg says. I can attest to the fact, because I know his numbers, because we compete all the time. I kept trying to beat Louisville, being from New Orleans, and he was trying to beat me. I mean, mayors work in these fierce competitions. We know that in 2040, where people are moving to. We know, so like we want our cities to compete, which is why cities in America are the hubs of innovation. This is why we're the laboratories of democracy. It's the reason why all the smart stuff is happening and things actually work, and mayors are not ideologically bent. You don't, when the mayors get together, we don't go, hey, the Republican way of filling that pothole is this way, and the Democratic way is that way, or we want to work with, we can't work with the union. We don't know, we're just like, what's the answer to the problem? And how fast can we fix it so that we lift our city up? And so I would encourage you, as you're thinking through this, take a good look at your city. He may deserve to get criticized from time to time about something that's not perfect. But if your city is honest and it's open and it's transparent and it's ascending and it's actually functioning really well, which is to say that most of your tax dollars are being spent great, don't play gotcha, like run over in the corner and say, oh, you wasted $1. Everybody wastes a little bit of money sometimes just because the world is that way. But if as a general rule your city's working the right way, what you hate as a mayor, this is the worst part of our job. Our staff people coming in and say, you have to make a choice. And your choices are between bad and worse. So like there is no good answer, because no matter what I answer to this question, the city is going to be worse. That's not where you want to be as a city. Where you want to be is having the mayor and the city council and all the, the city leaders choosing between better and best. That's where you want to be. And so when you have difficult issues like you're facing right now, because in cities we can't print money like the federal government, we actually have to balance our budgets. We are required by law for it to be even. If you put your city leaders in a position where this question, this is not a good question to have asked. When you make the cuts, who are you going to protect and who are you going to hurt? That's not where you want to be as a city. That's not going to help you become an ascending city. It's not going to help you continue to compete with Los Angeles and Chicago and New York, which, by the way, are blowing and going. And so I would just say to all the people here, to the extent when you're thinking about designing a city that you want, make sure that you design it the way that you want. And if you want to become a city that is financially unstable or doesn't have a trust fund or is in a place where you're not investing in neighborhoods but detracting from neighborhoods, you might want to think about it like that when somebody comes to you who otherwise has a great reputation for managing budgets really well, says, I need a little bit more. You go, oh, maybe that's the right answer. It's always much easier to kill a revenue measure than to pass one. It's a lot easier to tear a house down than to build it up. And so as I kind of run around the country advising mayors because of our work in New Orleans, one of the most difficult things I was to do is to try to do something with nothing. Do you know what you do with nothing? Nothing. And when I say that less is less and more is more, it just seems such a simple thing that we seem to kind of just allow ourselves to be tricked into. And so I want to end tonight where I started, if I might have the privilege of doing that. I've traveled all over the country. Like Greg, who's going to be the president of the United States Conference of Mayors, I served as a president for all of the mayors in America, 1,400 cities with 30,000 people or more. He's really great. He's really great, A. And Louisville is a spectacular city, and you're on everybody's radar screen. When I go to talk to all the major philanthropic organizations, and we're all looking at the cities that are really popping, that are really making a name for themselves, Louisville is always at the top of every list. I'm not kidding you. I mean, like, y'all have it going on. And I would encourage you, notwithstanding the difficulties that you have in your specific neighborhoods, and you have everything that everybody else has. I'm not here to tell you that you're perfect. That wouldn't be truthful. But you have a base of great talent, intellectual talent, raw material, raw capital. You have an accumulation that other cities don't have, and I think you have 128 languages being spoken in your schools. You have an international anchor. And there's no reason why Louisville, if you grow the correct way, can't actually become a much more spectacular, and I say much more spectacular than you already are, because your approach has been really, really good. And I would tell you the opposite if I found it to be true, because I'm kind of into truth telling these days. You got a good thing going on here. And I would encourage you to keep doing the things that are helping you do good things, and then put away the things that actually drag you down and keep you away. He's not going to be the mayor 5 years from now. Somebody else will be. And that somebody else ought to follow what it is that the citizens want them to do, and what the long-term vision is for Louisville 2040 or Louisville 2050. It's not too soon to be thinking about what are we doing today, and are we taking the steps that are going to get us where we want to be so that we can be purposeful and intentional. All I have to say to you is you got a great start, And it seems to me that you're doing really, really well, and I hope you continue to do that. Thank you.
This has been a Metro TV production.